Welcome back, John Jenkins. We're going to pick up on the chronology of William Rehnquist, who was our 16th Chief Justice of the United States. But first, let me ask you a couple questions about you and how you decided to write this book. I know you had done a piece on William Rehnquist for the New York Times Magazine in 1985, but here we are in 2012. I know it didn't take you that long.
No, it didn't take me that long.
So tell us a little bit about why you decided to do it at this point.
Well, in 1985, I was assigned this story by the Times, and I met with Rehnquist twice in interviews in 1984. It's kind of interesting. I'd written him a letter and introduced myself. He had not given, to my knowledge, any interviews at all. And we weren't sure whether he would accept this or not. But he sent a letter back right away, which he was very, very punctilious about that. He sent a letter back right away, and he said, why don't you come in and we'll get to know each other a little bit better, and then I'll decide whether I want to cooperate or not. And I vowed, I'm just going to go in with my tape recorder and my questions and be fully prepared, and I'll let him throw me out if he doesn't want to have this conversation. And in fact, he had the conversation, and we had two very, very good meetings. Time goes by. During my research for the Times, my editor at the time was encouraging me, dig for the origins of his conservatism. What is that? There's got to be more here. This guy is kind of wired from birth almost as an arch conservative. Dig hard for that, John. And so I did, and I think I did a credible job with the information available. But after his death and the availability of papers, it took Stanford. He had given his papers to Stanford University, and it took them about 3 years. To the Hoover Institution at Stanford. Considered a very, very conservative, and it is, institution, and he put significant restrictions on the papers that he probably wouldn't have been able to do had he given them, as many justices do, to the Library of Congress. So 3 years after his death, the papers become available. That's probably 2008. And so I knew that I needed to jump on that and be the one to go through those papers and hopefully find something that would help me tell the story of this man. And the papers were just a vast trove. The case documents are still largely locked up because one of the considerations he has is that no papers can be available from relating to court cases when any justice who participated is still alive. And of course, John Paul Stevens comes on the court as an appointee of Gerald Ford and is still alive. So there are a lot of cases going all the way back there that are not open. But the cases from the first few years were. But I was more interested in his personal papers, his letters to his children, his letters to his family, his diaries, the books that he made notes about, and all that's just fascinating, and in thousands upon thousands of files that are out there at the Hoover Institution.
That's great. And several of the justices with whom he served also had opened their papers.
Yes,
Lewis Powell, who kept every note that William Rehnquist wrote to him.
And so did Harry Blackman. Harry Blackman kept every note, and the entirety of those notes is out there. Because Blackman put absolutely no restrictions at all. And Powell, even though Powell's papers are at Washington and Lee University, the curators of those papers, they're technically not supposed to be open, I think, but the curators of those papers are very, very helpful.
Oh,
and
completely.
so I was very, very pleased, and I have to thank them for those Powell documents, because that showed a side of William Rehnquist, as did the papers of Blackman, and the papers of Douglas showed a side of Rehnquist that I thought was very important to reveal.
Speaking of Lewis Powell and William Rehnquist both come on the Supreme Court in January of 1972. They're sworn in. Tell us a little bit about the role that William Rehnquist played in his own selection. When he comes to Washington, where we left off in our first segment, he comes with Richard Kleindienst. He becomes an assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice, and he starts having a hand in selection for Supreme Court nominees. And lo and behold, in fall of 1971, he becomes one. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Rehnquist is the person that is at the Justice Department put in charge, by and large, vetting the Nixon administration's nominees to the court. And his record on this is actually very mixed, I have to say. And so,
mixed in terms of who he ends up vetting successfully?
Who he ends up vetting successfully, and some of the things that he lets slip through, unfortunately, that good or bad, he is taking the fall for and the responsibility for. So, as I mentioned, Richard Nixon had come on to into the presidency with a commitment to appoint conservative Southerners to the court. That was one of his campaign promises. Hard for us to even think about this today, but Nixon was a complex guy in his own right, and that was one of the things that he had done. And so Rehnquist here in the Department of Justice is now supposed to be helping him find these guys. And the very first two vacancies, first two nominees that go up to the court are Clement Haynesworth and Harold Carswell, G. Harold Carswell, both of whom fail to get to be confirmed. And sort of Rehnquist kind of takes the fall for that because he had vetted them both and professed them qualified, and then they just got hammered during the hearings. So by the time another vacancy comes up, and actually, so Nixon is getting this amazing confluence of 4 vacancies in his first term. It's pretty amazing. And the vacancies are also coming up at the same time. Two very early in his presidency, and then 2 more with Hugo Black and John Harlan. And Black and Harlan, within a couple of weeks of each other, both resign, and then Black dies almost immediately, and Harlan a few months later. So Nixon was looking to replace Black, but he certainly he was hoping that he could keep Harlan because he really liked Harlan. But Harlan was elderly and blind and had a lot of issues. So by this time, Nixon and his Attorney General Mitchell have decided they're going to take this thing over themselves. They can't really run the risk, and they've actually got another important job for Rehnquist at this point with these 2 new vacancies, which is he is supposed to be running a committee to declassify documents. And Nixon, in his diabolical efforts, Nixon believes that and Rehnquist, I'm sure, doesn't know this, but when the White House tapes came out later, it turns out that the reason he wants Rehnquist to do this is because he believes that if he can get these documents declassified, he can sort of use them to bang the image of the Kennedy family, particularly Bob Kennedy and JFK and even Ted Kennedy, and who he sees as a potential rival in the coming election. And Nixon, so the declassification of these documents, Nixon wants Rehnquist to handle so that he can leak the documents out. When it turns out that Rehnquist isn't going fast enough, Nixon and his other folks that later are discredited in Watergate, they actually just decide they're going to make up some documents and leak them anyway. That's a whole other thing. So what happens is Rehnquist is busy over there doing that, and meanwhile, Mitchell and Nixon are trying to find 2 people to announce because Nixon wants to move fast on this.
Right, this is all in the fall of 1971.
All in the fall because he wants to do it fast before the 72 elections, and he also knows that time is his enemy. Getting the jump on someone fast after these vacancies comes out is really what he needs to do. And someone has the brilliant idea, actually Fred Moore in the White House, but he sells the idea to Mitchell.
Is it Dick Moore or is it Fred Moore?
I'm sorry, Dick Moore.
Yeah.
You're correct, Dick Moore. Dick Moore has, there was a Fred Moore. Dick Moore.
But not in this case.
No.
Yeah.
Dick Moore has this brilliant idea that Rehnquist is the guy, that he's smart and sort of, he's really going to be a guy that can be on the court for 30 years or more, which of course is exactly what happened. And they plant this seed with Nixon. Mitchell, actually, you can listen to the tape, and you can hear Mitchell and Nixon's kind of rolling around in his mind. And first he doesn't really like the idea, but he warms to it because he's got a deadline. He wants to make a speech. And actually, with 10 hours before the speech, he decides Rehnquist is his man, along with Lewis Powell.
It's fascinating. In fact, you mentioned the tapes, which any one of our viewers can go and get from the archives. You can put in your little cassette and make a copy and listen to it. Right. And hearing Richard Nixon, a graduate of Duke Law School, get kind of jealous when he's told about how smart Rehnquist was at Stanford. I remember the president says something to the effect of, well, maybe it wasn't as hard at Stanford as it was at Duke.
Right.
Because Mitchell, John Mitchell, the Attorney General, is of course talking about how smart William Rehnquist was, first in his class, and also having clerked for Justice